Is everybody fueled up on coffee? Because we're getting into the technical stuff now for the next few hours. Okay, so if you don't have coffee, I recommend that you make your way over there.
It's still percolating.
It's percolating.
Family thing here.
I was just applying some pressure to make sure the coffee comes. How many of you got rained on this morning? Anybody? Notice that Robert's one of the few people who raised his hand. If you notice in his bio, there's a raindrop above his head. It's my theory that the rain follows him around the state, probably for his good conservation efforts. It is my great pleasure to introduce Robert Mace, who is the Deputy Executive Administrator at the Texas Water Development Board. He also leads the agency's Water Science and Conservation Office. And Robert is known for a series of nicknames, including the Water Whisperer, Mr. Groundwater, and while he is a fountain of knowledge on all groundwater technical information, he also has a tremendous sense of humor and always makes presentations much more interesting than they probably otherwise would be. Robert is here to talk to you this morning about groundwater availability models, what they are, and I think this will play in really nicely to understanding the conversation in the afternoon about some of the regional water planning efforts. So with that, let's welcome Robert to the stage.
Thank you. So when the district called me up and asked me, this is my timer, because I can go 4 hours talking about this stuff, so I gotta make sure I stay on time. When the district called me up and asked me to speak about an hour to y'all about groundwater modeling, I thought, yeah, that'll be fun. That's a great idea. And then last week, as I was putting the presentation together, I was like, that's a terrible idea. Now, I can certainly talk an hour on groundwater modeling, but I think I would bore you all to tears. And the fact that there's no coffee, there would be probably riots. Oh, there's coffee now, so if you need to get capped up, now's a good time. I am going to talk to you about models, but I'm going to mix it up a little bit by first talking a bit about hydrogeology, some basics on hydrogeology. One of the key aspects of developing groundwater models is, of course, understanding your geology, your hydrogeology, understanding your aquifer. So this discussion will, I think, help set things up for y'all, not only for when I start talking about groundwater models, but also the subsequent presentations that you're going to hear this morning about desired future conditions and about the potential impacts of groundwater pumping on the aquifer and on surface water and spring flow. So the presentation I put together, I don't have a really good memory, but I'm much better at remembering concepts. And so I always like to start from basic principles and build from the ground up. And so the first part of this presentation is going to be focused just on that, on terminology, various aspects about hydrogeology, and then I'm going to tie that into your specific aquifers of interest, which for the most part is the Carrizo-Wilcox Aquifer, but then also the Queen City and Sparta. So hopefully you'll find this interesting. So two major parts of the presentation will be, I'll talk initially Aquifers 101, and then at the end, then I'll talk about what groundwater modeling is, how these models are put together, talk about the Groundwater Availability Modeling Program, which is something unique to Texas, and then where things are with the models for your area here. So, talking about groundwater, I think it's important to put it in the context of the water cycle. So this is a nice graphic from the U.S. Geological Survey that shows the water cycle. And I don't know how many of y'all, I know when I was in kindergarten or first grade, the teacher had us do a play of the water cycle. And so, right, I'm evaporation, I'm a cloud, I'm rainfall. I don't remember a groundwater component back when I was in kindergarten, so I don't know how I became a hydrogeologist. Groundwater does tend to be forgotten a little bit by folks, in large part because it's underground. You don't see it. You could argue maybe it's not as exciting, say, or as romantic as a river or a brook or a stream flowing through. But clearly it's an important part of the water supply for the state, for the world, and an important part of the water cycle. So here's that evaporation, condensation, clouds, rainfall. You get your runoff off of the streams. You've got reservoirs, flows back into the Gulf of Mexico. But there's also this kind of the slower road, typically, through a groundwater system, where you get water percolating into the ground, moving slowly, generally slowly through the ground, discharging into rivers and streams as base flow, feeding springs. You get interactions with the reservoirs, and then there's also groundwater discharge to the Gulf of Mexico or to the oceans. Sometimes those paths are short. Sometimes those flow paths in the groundwater system are quite long. One interesting thing I'd like to point out is that when you look at the kind of the water budget for Texas, 86% of all the rain that falls goes back up into the sky, whether through direct evaporation or mostly through transpiration, which is basically plant sweat. Plants taking the water out of the soil, sweating it back up in the atmosphere and going back up. 86%, most of the water that falls as rainfall goes right back up in the sky. Of the rest of that, 14%, most of that is runoff. About 1% of rainfall actually makes it down into the aquifers and comes back up. Doesn't sound like a lot. You know, you got most of the rainfall going into surface water systems. However, surface water systems, unless we build reservoirs, flows right out to the Gulf. And even the water that's stored in reservoirs is small compared to the water stored in aquifers. So we have a tremendous amount of water stored in aquifers. So although groundwater receives very little of the rainfall that falls, most of the freshwater storage setting aside the glaciers is in groundwater systems. So these are the major aquifers that the state, our agency, the Oregon Texas Water Agency, defines these for the state. There are 9 major aquifers. I'm not going to go through all of them since we're here to talk about y'all's area, but here's the Carrizo-Wilcox. All right, I was studying this last night. These are your counties, right? Milam, Burleson. This one's Milam, Burleson. I got that right? Nobody's saying that. Okay, I see some nods, yes. So you guys are underlain, as you know, by the Carrizo-Wilcox. You'll notice here we've got a solid color as well as a hashed color. And what that means, where it's a solid color, that's where you're standing right on the rocks of the Carrizo-Wilcox aquifer. Where you see the hashed, it means the aquifer layer has kind of taken a dive into the subsurface, and there's other rocks sitting on top of it. In other words, you're going to have to drill through some other stuff to hit the Carrizo-Wilcox aquifer. And then, of course, we at the state lump it into the Carrizo-Wilcox aquifer, but that aquifer is made up of various different layers. There's obviously the Carrizo part. Carrizo is where the fresh water is produced down in this part of the state. And then we've got the Wilcox, which is also made up of several layers. And up here, the Simsboro is the key layer of the Wilcox that's productive in terms of groundwater flow. You're going to hear me talk a little bit later just to compare and contrast about the Ogallala Aquifer up here. And then I'm going to refer to, at some point, to the Trinity Aquifer. Trinity Aquifer is kind of similar to the Carrizo-Wilcox. Gulf Coast, you notice, is all one solid color, but it's made up of multiple aquifers that's similar to the Carrizo-Wilcox dip down, where there's a layer you can stand on, and then you have to drill down and get that layer further on. We also recognize 21 minor aquifers. Again, I'm just going to focus on the ones of interest. But when you get down to this area, it's really the Queen City and the Sparta that are of interest. The Yeager-Jackson also crops out here. You might be wondering what's the difference between a major aquifer and a minor aquifer. Major aquifer is big water over a big area. And by big water, I mean very productive. Minor aquifers are one of two things: big water over a small area, or little water over a large area. So Queen City, Sparta are not as good at aquifers as the Carrizo-Wilcox, but that doesn't mean that they're not good aquifers, folks. There are people that use those systems. And why go deeper if you can get what you need shallower? All right, I'm using this term aquifer. What is an aquifer? And quite simply, there's various definitions out there. It's interesting that there's not a single definition that everybody agrees on. But this is the definition that I like. It's based mostly on the U.S. Geological Survey. I've changed a little bit, but aquifer is geologic media that can yield economically usable amounts of water. And geologic media, basically that's just dirt, fancy words for dirt and rocks, sediments in the subsurface. And then economically usable is an interesting part of this definition. This is pretty consistent with definitions of aquifers. Depends on who's using it, if it's economically usable. So it might be useful to a rancher that needs some small amounts of water for his cattle. It's not going to work well for a large city like San Antonio. So from the perspective of a rancher, that's an aquifer. From the perspective of a large city, that's not an aquifer because it doesn't produce enough water. So it's a little, might be, if you're very judgmental, have a kind of a judgy type personality, might be very unsatisfying because it's not a fine line on exactly what is and isn't. Oh, there's a flicker down here. Oh yeah, there it is. It's hiding in the dark. Cool, thank you. I think you're coming back here. So what is an aquifer? And basically it's limestone, especially if it's karstified, sandstone, sand, gravel, fractured rocks. Here we're talking sandstone. San Antonio, you're talking karstified limestone. Most of the kind of coastal aquifers, which I'd include Carrizo, Wilcox, Queen City, Sparta, Gulf Coast, the Trinity Aquifer on the Colorado River, it's mostly sandstones that we're getting the water from. What's it look like? There it is. That's what it looks like. Just schematically, that's what I'm going to show an aquifer being. Some folks picture, this may be misleading, some folks picture a giant void of water in the subsurface. But imagine looking at a piece of sandstone or limestone, maybe cladding a building that you've seen. That's typically what aquifers look like. If you look at it, you're thinking, how the heck does water get through that? But it does, especially if it's fractured. See, that's not fair to tell me this. I've got this and it doesn't work. I don't mind coming back here. Okay, so what is an aquitard? So you hear aquifer a bit, maybe you don't hear aquitard as much, but that's geologic media that cannot yield economically usable amounts of water. So going back to the rancher in the big city, and the rancher, that's an aquifer to him, but to the city might be an aquitard. So it kind of depends on your perspective, how much water you need, if it's an aquifer or not. Aquitards, nonetheless, are pretty important. Oftentimes, they're clay, shale, unfractured, dense rocks, thinking granites and stuff like that. However, it's important to note it can still transmit water, but slowly. And over long periods of time, over large areas, it actually can be a substantial amount of water. You're generally not putting wells into an aquitard and producing water out of it. But as you'll see shortly, it is an important part of hydrogeology. In fact, shortly is now. What is a confining layer? You may hear folks later this morning talk about confining layers. And that's basically an aquitard that bounds an aquifer. So I've slapped an aquitard on the bottom of the aquifer I showed you earlier, and it's a confining layer. It's a good thing they exist, because if we didn't have this, all of our water would be drained to China. That would not be good. We'd be talking about something totally different today. So fortunately, there's a bottom on all these aquifers that serves as a confining layer. So what is a bedosome? So there's going to be points where I start getting more technical I would like to get, but it's kind of unavoidable. Vadose zone is just a fancy word for where there ain't water, the unsaturated zone. So an aquifer, what I showed you, that's full of water, but then there's sediments that isn't full of water. There still may be water in it, through the capillarity. You take your paper towel and you dip it in water, and the water kind of creeps up. That's called capillarity. So there's often always water in the rocks, it's just not fully saturated. That's called the unsaturated zone, or the vadose zone. Some of these slides, you can see a grumpy science guy down here, because I know they're out there, and they're going to take me later. Oh, that was baloney, you didn't tell the folks the truth. I'm simplifying some things, but down here I'm noting there's a saturated capillary zone between the vadose zone and the water table. That actually is fully saturated, but it's generally pretty small. It's, in the grand scheme of things, you don't have to worry about it, and then it keeps those irritating people from bothering me later. All right, so what's the vadose zone look like? Here we go. We slapped it on the top of our aquifer. So we've got our aquitard in the bottom, we've got our aquifer, and now we've got our vadose zone, and I had to put a tree up there, it's land surface. And so this is saturated with water, this is not saturated with water. And then we've got our bottom down here. So when you hear me talk about vadose zone or unsaturated zone or someone else, hopefully you don't hear that term anymore this morning after my presentation. You probably won't, but who knows when we start talking about impacts of pumping a little bit later. So water table, and it's one of the challenges, is like to introduce some of these terms or mention some of these terms earlier. And y'all probably already know what a water table is. But just to be complete, water table is where the aquifer meets the vadose or the unsaturated zone. There's that dang grumpy science guy. Technically it's a surface on which the fluid pressure in the pores of a porous medium is exactly atmospheric pressure. That's why we hate that guy. So we've been talking about a water table, we've already seen it. Water table is right there where we have the aquifer and the vadose zone. I'll note the water table, and y'all probably know this, it moves around. Depending on the pumping and what's going on with rainfall and recharge, which we'll talk about in a bit. We'll talk about pumping in a bit too. But the thickness of the aquifer may actually change. If we get drought, water table falls, and we have a saturated thickness is less than it was before, and the vadose zone is bigger. We go into a wet spell for several years, or Gary shuts everyone off of pumping, water table rises, and we get a smaller vadose zone and a thicker aquifer, thicker saturated zone in the aquifer. So we can see that variability occurring. Question is does it affect the aquitard? Not really. Grumpy science guy would say yes, because there's increased pressure down here, and so you can be pushing more water into this aquitard. But in terms of how the aquifer is functioning, it doesn't really matter that much. Good question. Go ahead, we're making good time. If you guys want to throw out questions as we go along, please do. What is recharge? Recharge is water that infiltrates to the water table of an aquifer. And I want to stress that this is water that actually reaches the water table. It's not water that infiltrates from the ground surface down, because the plants are pulling a lot of that water out of the root zone and the soils and kicking it back up into the atmosphere, relating back to that 86% I was telling you all earlier. But once it gets past, that water gets past the root zone, it's a good chance it's going to trickle its way all the way down and make it to the water table. And so it's not until that water crosses that threshold and gets into the aquifer with the saturated zone do we count that as recharge. Sometimes folks are sloppy, including technical folks, are sloppy with this term. Let's say, for example, there's water flowing through this aquifer from my side over to that side. Some folks might sloppily refer to this as recharge. That is not correct. That is flow coming into a defined area, but that is not recharge. Recharge is very specifically what I just described. And all my books, on my bookshelf at least, hydrogeology books, describe it that way, and I think that makes sense. As I mentioned, recharge generally is a small amount of the rainfall. In the Everett's Aquifer has some spectacular recharge events where they've got caves, literally caves and riverbeds and whirlpools, water rushing down. It's awesome to watch those videos, but generally for most aquifers in the state, and certainly for the Carrizo Wilcox, it's not that exciting. You know, it's just, there's really not much to watch except wet dirt as that water's, you know, slowly trickling down. What is a water level? I say, Robert, that's pretty dang basic, but this becomes important a little bit later. I'm saying, you know what? Water level is a level at which water rests or would rest in a well. So let's go back to the aquifer that we've built over here, aquifer system that we've built. And now we've drilled a well into it. Here's our well screen down here. So this solid pipe is now open to the aquifer to interact with the aquifer, let water flow in. If you let that well sit, the water level will rise up to, in this case, the water table. So that's what a water level is, quite simply. And I'm sure you're going to hear people talk about declining water levels a little bit later, or the desired future condition based on a drawdown, which we'll talk about drawdown in a bit too. That's all it is. That's what the water level is. If you put in a well, where would that water level be from the aquifer?
Is it limited to the water table, or can the pressure in the aquifer actually push higher than the water table?
Question is it limited to the water table, or can the pressure in the aquifer push it higher? Pressure in the aquifer can push it higher. We're going to talk about that in a bit. That's what I'm setting you all up for. So you know exactly where I'm going. So 2 rules of groundwater flow. Water flows downhill to, and the grumpy science guy would say, water flows actually to lower potential energy. Water flows downhill, and it goes from higher water levels to lower water levels. Hydrogeologists generally know that, like, if you're out on a piece of land and someone says, which way do you think the groundwater's flowing? You kind of look at the topography of the land and go, yeah, it's most likely it's going that way. Because generally water tables, and even in pressurized water systems, the water is flowing in the direction of the topography. There's some physical reasons for that I won't go into. It's also important to know that it does flow to lower potential energy, and there's cases, particularly around, say, rivers and springs, where the water goes down, groundwater goes down, actually flows back up. So it's going from a lower pressure to a higher pressure. So you can actually get water flowing up towards a spring or towards a river. It's not exactly downhill, but it certainly is downhill in potential energy. And water flows uphill to money. We'll do that shortly. So water flows downhill. This is water levels is such a simple thing. You got a well, you got steel tape, maybe you've got a fancy E-line that beeps when it hits the water level, and you get a measurement for that water level. And then if you know the land surface elevation where that well is, there is an amazing amount of information that you can learn about your aquifer from those simple measurements. It's just absolutely fantastic. And we have a program where we measure water levels across the state and the state's aquifers, and we work with groundwater districts like Ph.D, Savannah, to pull in their information if they're collecting more data, more detailed data to put into our database. Again, we can learn a lot, and I'll tell you a little bit about what we can learn. Most importantly, it's like, we know what the level is, we know how full the aquifer is, so to speak. But if we get multiple wells, we can start figuring out which way the water is flowing. So in this diagram, I'm showing two wells, and one comes up to this level, and the other one actually comes up a little higher. So if this is sea level down here, let's say this is 100 feet above sea level, and then this is 90 feet below sea level, and water is going to flow from the higher water level to the lower water level. These are also potential measurements of potential, higher potential to lower potential. Now the grumpy scientists in here would say, you need 3 wells to figure out exactly which way the water's going. Just tell them to go get another cup of coffee and shut up. But just to prove the concept, if you've got a number of wells and you know the elevation of that water level, you can figure out which way the water's going. Sometimes it's a simple answer, yeah, the water's all going that way. Sometimes more complicated. It goes around this hill, there's a well pumping over there, and the water's flowing over that well. You can see all that with measurements of water levels. I couldn't find a satisfying map showing water levels and water level paths for the Cruiser Wilcox up here. So I'm showing you an example from the hill country that I think is easier to explain. So forgive me for that, but the concepts are all the same. This is the hill country Trinity. So San Antonio's down here, Austin's up here. There's Lake Travis. And then this purple line is showing the limits of the aquifer that we're looking at, we're studying. And I first want to draw your attention to these light blue lines. So how we developed these blue lines was we went out and we measured water levels all over the hill country. We then hung them off of sea level, so height above sea level. And then once we had all those numbers, we went through and contoured into equal water levels. So it's like a topographic map. You all use topographic maps and you kind of see where a lane contour is. It's basically a topographic map for the aquifer water levels. So all these blue lines are that. So this is 800 feet above sea level. Here's 800, here's 1,000 feet, 1,200 feet, 1,400 feet, 1,600 feet above sea level. And we're looking down. The previous plot I showed you, we're kind of looking sideways. Now we're looking down. Groundwater tends, in almost all cases, to flow perpendicular to these contours. It's like if you took a marble on your topography, your topographic map, you had it 3D, you drop the marble, it's going to follow the greatest slope. Groundwater, not in all cases, but in most cases, does the same thing. So what I've done here is drawn these just about, kind of screwed up here a little bit, but just about perpendicular to these lines. So we can see from simply going out and measuring wells where the water's coming from and where it's going. This tells us that we've got water sourcing way out here in Gillespie County. It's flowing in some cases all the way over here, probably discharging to the Colorado River. This is the Edwards Aquifer here, and this is suggesting that this water is actually flowing from the Trinity Aquifer into the Edwards Aquifer across faults. Another neat thing is you'll notice, let's focus on this light blue line, it undulates a little bit. And here we've got, what is that, the Guadalupe River? So you'll see the water level contour kind of pressing upstream of the Guadalupe River. Well, what that's telling us is that the groundwater system is actually flowing into the river. It's providing spring flow and base flow to the river. We see that down here. This is the Medina River. You kind of see that bending upwards. Here's somebody help me, what is this? I'm forgetting. Cibolo Creek, there we go. Here's Cibolo Creek. Contour goes pretty much straight across it, no bend. But that tells us, what the water levels are telling us, there's no interaction between the groundwater system and the creek. And at this particular case, at this particular time, that indeed is the case. It doesn't show up here, but sometimes you'll get these contours that bend upstream, which tells you the river is pushing a bunch of water into the aquifer. So hopefully I've convinced you water levels are a great thing. just in terms of understanding what is going on with these aquifer systems. Okay, so there's two, this kind of gets to the question the gentleman was asking a little earlier, two broad types of aquifers. I said broad because there's variations in between, the grumpy scientists will tell you. But broadly, an unconfined aquifer and a confined aquifer. There's semi-confined aquifers, kind of a spectrum in between, but we're just going to talk about unconfined and confined today. So an unconfined aquifer is an aquifer that is bounded by a confining layer at its bottom, but not at its top. Maybe that sounds familiar, because so far that's what we've been talking about. Here's our aquifer, we got our beta zone, here's our confining layer at the bottom. We don't have one at the top confining this aquifer at all. So all along we've been talking about an unconfined aquifer. And in fact, the water table is a term that only works, is only appropriate in an unconfined aquifer. If your aquifer is under pressure, there is no water table. What's a confined aquifer? So this is an aquifer that's bounded by confining layers at the bottom and at the top, and where the water level in the aquifer rises above the top of the aquifer. In other words, it's under pressure. Scientific side note, it's also called an Artesian Aquifer. And these days, Artesian does not mean you have to flow at land surface. Back when the term was first used for wells, it required a flowing at the land surface. And if you got water flowing at the land surface, generally it's guaranteed to be an Artesian aquifer. But once scientists better understood aquifers and realized physical processes, they realized you didn't necessarily have to have water squirting on the ground for it to be Artesian. The grumpy scientists would call it Artesian flowing well if it's flowing. If it's not flowing, it still may be Artesian. So what's that look like? And it looks like this. So we've got our aquifer layer. We've got a confining layer both at the bottom and the top. We've got our well sunk into this aquifer. Now notice where the water level is. It's way up here. It's above the top of the aquifer. The only way it gets up there is because the water in here is under pressure. It's pushing it up the well, creating an Artesian well. Any questions about that before we go on? Y'all with me? Sir?
What produces pressure?
Great question. Generally, and I'll show you a slide in a bit that shows this, but generally, if I see this happening, it means the recharge zone is at a higher elevation. So at some point out this direction or that direction or maybe that direction, the recharge zone is sitting a lot higher to where the water table in the recharge zone is sitting higher than this level. And so you got that water pressing down and pushing the water up this well a little further down. Maybe another way of thinking about it is like, how you can use a garden hose to level things out, or clear pipe. If you put water in it, if you lift up on one side of the pipe, the water level will come with it and it'll re-equilibrate and level out. Because you get higher pressure on one side versus the other. Sir?
Is that level predictable if you know the elevation of the recharge zone and the depth of your aquifer?
Question is that level predictable if we know the height of the recharge zone and the depth of the aquifer? I'm a modeler, I can predict anything. But accurately, kind of depends on the aquifer. To be able to really predict it, I would have to have if I had a good estimate of the aquifer properties, how easy water flows through the aquifer, which we'll talk about a little bit. The geometry of the aquifer, I can make a pretty good, I think, estimate of where that is. It wouldn't be the ideal situation though, because generally aquifers are variable. and it can be difficult to figure out where exactly that level is. Good questions. So, oh yeah, here we go. It's the next slide. So, same aquifer, unconfined and confined. You know, generally, with the confined aquifer, this simple situation I've shown here, almost always there has to be an unconfined part to this aquifer. In other words, there has to be a place for the water to come in to have gotten the water in there and replenished it. Grumpy scientists would say, well, there are circumstances where you do get fresh water with no recharge zone. That generally happens with, you can see that with deep oil and gas exploration. Sometimes they hit fresh water at great depths, and there's no recharge zone. And you know, just through the geochemistry and through pressures, it's under pressure, and there's no recharge zone. For vast majority of aquifers, if not all, almost all aquifers, there's got to be a place where the water comes in. So now we're showing up here on your left, water table aquifer, kind of what we've been talking about. Rather than have a flat bottom, we're now showing something that's more realistic for the Carrizo Wilcox and the Queen City and the Sparta. It's dipping down. I have this greatly vertically exaggerated. When you look at kind of actually how much it's dipping down our aquifers here, it's not that much. It's not impressive. In fact, it's hard to see. So you gotta expand it out like this to see. So this is overly dramatic to make the point, but we would see this, and then hopefully you can see, you know, things are lower here. This is a little higher, and this is a little higher. So the pressure on these wells deeper down is coming from this water pushing down on the aquifer up there. You also get pressure from this overburden resting on top of the aquifer, kind of squeezing the water as well. Got 3 wells here, so you know, based on this, looks like the water's heading this way, which is what, you know, if it had no water levels, that's what I'd say, because you know, that's generally how these systems work. I don't show it on here, but you know, this entire surface here, kind of this interface between the aquifer and the confining layer, there's water slowly seeping up through this. And that becomes rather important, because if you don't have kind of water, you know, flowing through here and flowing out, it's highly unlikely your aquifer is going to be fresh. A lot of these sediments were originally put down in ocean systems and had seawater in them, and so they have to be flushed out. But again, very slowly, this water is seeping up and ultimately making its way up to the land surface, probably to a stream or a spring at some point. Other thing I should note is kind of a trick question is, this part of the aquifer here, is it confined or unconfined? It's actually unconfined. Now it does have a confining layer sitting on top of it in the bottom, but the water level is within the aquifer, not above the aquifer. And then of course, as water levels change, you know, this may change as well. So what used to be yesterday unconfined, today might be confined. So there's a transition zone, and it can change over time. Generally for sandstone aquifers like the Carrizo Wilcox, Queen City, and Sparta, there's not big changes happening. Edwards Aquifer, where water flows through it like a greased pig, you know, there can be big changes in the water levels and whether it's confined or unconfined. So just bringing you back to this map, you know, so here's the unconfined recharge zone, and then here's the part that's deeper down. So here's the solid parts that we're looking at on those maps, and then here's the part that's underneath the hash. So let's talk a little bit about recharge. Now I've drawn this overly simple. Grumpy hydrogeologists out there would say that's not accurate. It's accurate in some cases. I think it's pretty accurate or much of the Edwards Aquifer, where the water table is really not in close contact with the land surface in the recharge zone. And it's completely decoupled from there. But in sandstone aquifers like the aquifers here, you get more of a picture that looks like this. Remember I told you earlier that groundwater tends to follow topography. When you've got hills in your recharge zone, you'll get different flow lines or flow systems in your aquifer. So you'll get flow that's local, kind of comes in and discharges locally to a creek, river, or a stream. You'll get some intermediate ones that go a little longer. Here's that kind of flowing up. It's going down, higher potential to lower potential. And then you get these longer flow lines that actually go deep into the aquifer, down dip into the aquifer is what we would call it. That's feeding the regional flow system. So the interesting thing about this is that everything that recharges the aquifer here does not go down deeper into the aquifer. And folks will call this effective recharge. Now back in the old days, folks would call from an aquifer biased viewpoint of the world, they would call this rejected recharge. Because it's gone into the aquifer system and it's gone out to the blasted, dastardly surface water and spring systems. We're talking 70, 80 years ago, people thinking about this way. Reality is just part of the flow system and water is heading down dip. Another thing to point out is that when people talk about sustainable pumping, you don't pump sustainably by pumping this, because you will have massive water level declines and have production issues. Really, you need to be looking at what this is. And then to further complicate things, this responds to pumping. And so here's our water level surface. If we pump it, we're going to pull it down, and that's actually going to pull more water from this system up here down into the aquifer, increasing the effective recharge. And we'll probably be talking about some of those things at the first panel discussion. Any questions about that? That's a lot of science in a short chunk of time there. Kind of the major point is recharge is not simply, it's not like how I did my college or my banking account in college. It's not money coming in, money going out. Money's going everywhere. You got money going to your cable bill, they pull money out automatically for your electrical bill, and this is the margarita money. And so you got to be looking for the margarita money. Does that even make any sense? Okay, moving on. Okay, I'm only introducing these terms. This is getting a little technical. I'm only introducing these terms, so if you hear them, you kind of vaguely know what they are. Permeability, hydraulic conductivity, transmissivity. These are terms that just simply describe how easy it is for water to flow through the geologic media, flow through the aquifer, or the aquifer. They're all related to each other through mathematics. It gets dull real quick. But when you hear these terms, just know it's a description of how easy water flows through an aquifer. Back over a decade ago, I was working with the Attorney General's office on a case out in El Paso. It was a groundwater case that they had, and we were fixing to depose the expert for the other side, and transmissivity was an important part of the discussion, and the state attorney kept saying transvestitivity. Whatever, we'd probably be like, no, dude, no, transmissivity. And they'd be like, we'd get out and ask questions, transvestitivity. And it's like, I don't know if there's a Freudian slip going on there, what was going on, but I did have a mustache, so, but not transvestitivity, transmissivity. So hopefully you never hear these terms again in your life, but if you do, you know what they are. All right, so getting back to the two rules of groundwater flow. Water flows downhill, water flows uphill to money. What I mean by that is if you're willing to invest energy, which generally requires money, then you can get the water to flow towards you. And the way this is commonly done is with a water well. And so here's our water well we showed before, but now I've stuck a pump down in here. And I've got it turned on, I got water squirting out. This is an unconfined water table aquifer. And you'll see that in response, we've lowered the water table around this well. If this was in 3 dimensions, this would look like a cone. And folks refer to it as the cone of depression. Not a psychological term, it's a term about how pumping affects the water levels in an aquifer. If you remember what I said about water flowing downhill or down potential, you can see, this is higher, lower, lower, lower. This water is flowing towards this well, basically. So this is a way that people can change the flow systems in an aquifer and produce water. This is an example from an unconfined aquifer. How does a confined aquifer respond? And it's similar, yet different. There's a confined aquifer, we've got our confining layers on both sides. I've got my pumping well in here, but now I've got kind of 2 monitoring wells. I could have showed those in the other ones, but did it here. And what I show in a dashed line here is where the water level would be if we had wells everywhere in this aquifer. And so originally it was flat, and then someone came, flipped on the pump, and it caused a cone of depression in the water levels. Water flows down potential, higher, lower, 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 water's flowing towards this well here. So we also get a cone of depression for decreasing water levels from pumping a confined aquifer. Okay, got over here. Mm-hmm. Oh. Yeah, the question was, like I showed earlier, that it said the wells were under pressure. She thought that meant it had a pump on it, but no, it's naturally under pressure. And so what's happening here is now we put a pump in, we're pumping water out. Aquifer's still under pressure here, but we've lowered the pressure in the aquifer. And that causes water to then flow towards that well and come out the well. I should note that if you have big wells, lots of pumping, maybe multiple wells, and you can actually pull this down below the top of the aquifer, and for part of the aquifer, you might convert it from a confined aquifer to an unconfined aquifer. That's certainly possible. So I think I only have, there we go, one more awful technical term. There's no way of getting around it, I'm sorry. Storativity. And this is a technical term, and what it describes is the amount of water that gets released from an aquifer for a unit decline in water level. Okay? So it's a measure of, if I pump this aquifer, if I pump this well, how much water am I going to get for a unit decline? It relates to, in part, to productivity of the well and how long you'll be able to pump that well. Grumpy scientist, storativity is a general term. It applies to both unconfined and confined aquifers. You sometimes hear people call storativity an unconfined aquifer specific yield. Keep that for family trivia night. We can roll that one out. Impress everybody. Storativity between unconfined and confined aquifers, there's a massive difference between these numbers. Now the reason is when you pump an unconfined aquifer, you're physically draining the pores out. You're draining the water between the sand grains and the limestone and the fractures. You're draining it out and leaving it unsaturated. In a confined aquifer, you're not doing that. Like that previous picture I showed, aquifer was still full. We're pumping water out of it, but the aquifer is still full. So where the heck is that water coming from? In many cases, it's related to compressibility. So believe it or not, the water molecules expand out a little bit because you're under less pressure. It's like if you're at a Garth Brooks show and and he says something that makes people mad and half the crowd leaves, you got more elbow room. And then also it comes from the ground kind of coming down on the aquifer a little more, because the pressure is helping to hold up the ground. Some aquifers more than others. Up here we don't worry about land subsidence. Houston has sunk upwards of 10 feet due to groundwater production because it's reduced the pressure and the ground's going to collapse in a little bit. Big pumping over long periods of time. The cone of depression can reach out to the recharge zone. We'll probably be talking about that a little later this morning. May reach out to some other large areas to capture storage. Generally, storativity is dimensionless. So, yeah, it's dimensional. There's no dimensions at all. It's like a unit volume decrease in unit volume of aquifer. Unit volume decrease or produced water in a unit volume of aquifer. So for an unconfined aquifer, this is equivalent to like a porosity. Not quite porosity because you leave water behind you, capillary forces, but typically it's close to a porosity. So this is like 1% porosity in the fracture system to 30% porosity in a system. Down here though, it's compressible, and you'll see it's a lot smaller. Those are tiny numbers. Reason that's important is because aquifers, I'm going to skip over this one. Aquifers respond very differently to pumping, unconfined aquifers and confined. So what I'm going to show you in the next two slides is the exact same aquifer. Everything's the same. The transvestite activity is the same between the two. Thickness is the same. Pumping is the same. The amount of time we pump this well is the same. The only thing that's different is the storativity. One is unconfined, one is confined. So this is the unconfined aquifer. I've run a simulation based on equations, and I've pumped 300 gallons a minute per day. And we've got a water level decline or a drawdown in the well of 44 feet. And the cone of depression extends out 166 feet from this well. Okay? Which is, that's a pretty decent amount of water level decline in the well. It's a pretty decent, good size cone of depression. Everything's the same now, except now we're flipping the switch from an unconfined to a confined aquifer. So now the drawdown is 73 feet in the confined aquifer, and the cone of depression sticks out almost 2,900 feet. The reason why it looks this way, it's a lot easier to get water when you're actually draining the aquifer versus getting 300 gallons a minute when you're relying on the compressibility of water in the rock. The reason I bring this point up is the production for these coastal aquifers, including Wilcox, is mostly from the confined zone. And so this is what's impacting. In almost all cases, you're not actually physically draining the aquifer, you're bleeding pressure off. Back in the old days, this is a graphic from 1901, R.T. Hill, USGS. It was a big deal to have a flowing artesian well, and so he mapped out the zones in the state, and you can see most of the coastal area of Texas had flowing artesian wells that you could get. And then here's what the picture looks like today. This is total water level declines in all the major aquifers of our state. You hear a lot about the Ogallala. Ogallala, we pump 6 million acre feet a year out of. 40% of all the water used in Texas comes from the Ogallala aquifer. Doesn't look so bad, does it, on this plot? Doesn't look so bad. What stands out to you? Yeah, what the hell are they doing in Dallas and Waco? What's going on there is that aquifer's not as good as the Wilcox. And more importantly, though, compared to the Ogallala, confined. Confined. This is all confined. Ogallala is a water table unconfined aquifer. So up there, they're actually draining the aquifer. Here, we're bleeding off pressure. And so I've got some stats here. So the Trinity Aquifer, they only pump 3% of the water that they pump out of the Ogallala. And we've got water level declines over 1,000 feet in Dallas-Fort Worth. The Creso-Wilcox as a whole is about 7% of the pumping that occurs in the Ogallala. So I'm beating a dead horse here, but I just want to make sure y'all understand that these aquifers here respond very differently, and they're very different than some of the other aquifers in the state. And that is going to inform some of the discussions we have a little later. So any further questions on this before I talk about modeling? All right, must have done a good job, or the coffee's not strong. All right, so let's talk about revenge of the synthetic aquifers. Talk about groundwater modeling. So first off, what is a groundwater model? And quite simply, it's just the aquifer in a computer. There I am working on one. It's just taking what we know about an aquifer and put it into a computer where we can simulate it. Groundwater follows some defined equations. They actually mathematically look very similar to equations that describe the flow of electricity, that describe the flow of heat. Groundwater kind of follows those same physical type equations. And so we have the information, like the fellow was asking earlier, if you know this and that, can you figure that out? With a model, I can put in some parameters, put in what I know, and then simulate it, and make an estimate of what I think the Artesian pressure is at some point in the aquifer where I don't have data at, which is the power of modeling. The very first model I can find that was developed in Texas was by the USGS for the Gulf Coast Aquifer in the Houston area in response to land subsidence issues. And you guys might get this joke. I call this the one ringy dingy, two ringy dingy groundwater model. This is an electric analog, so it's using the equations that define the flow of electricity, which again are analogous to the equations that define the flow of groundwater. Since then, we've come a long way, and we can use computers to make those simulations. So it's just like the weathermen talk about. They run the weather models, and it shows that the rain's going to hit tomorrow at 3:15. We kind of do the same thing. We just hope we're more accurate than the weathermen. Typically, this is how a model development goes. We put together a conceptual model, and what that means, it's like the best idea in our head of how the system works. That's based on the water level data we collect. It's based on the water quality data, other studies we've done maybe on recharge, what we know about pumping, where are the wells. So we put together our best idea of how we think the aquifer works. Then based on that idea, we then create called model architecture. I'll show you a plot in a bit, or a graph in a bit. It shows that we just start building the aquifer in the computer. Once we have that, then we calibrate it. And what that means is we're history matching the model to what we know has happened in the past. So if we know, for example, that water levels have already gone down 100 feet in this area, and we have estimates of how much pumping occurred when, we will make sure the model matches that. We want to make sure it reproduces what we've actually seen in the past. If spring flows have gone down, we want to make sure that we can reproduce that as close as possible. We then do something called a sensitivity analysis, and what this is just seeing what the model's sensitive to. So maybe the model is real sensitive to recharge, maybe it's not. And it's important to know, because maybe we know recharge really well, maybe we don't. If the model's not sensitive to recharge, then maybe it's okay that we don't know recharge as well as we know. If you're married, you do this with your spouse, right? You know which buttons to push in terms of, getting them angry at you. It's kind of the same thing with models. What buttons do you push where the model's like, whoa, don't want to push that button again. That's good to know. And then once you have a calibrated model and understand where it's sensitive, what's important, you can then make predictions going forward. And then, of course, documenting And then almost always need to update the models. There's more data coming in. There's more we learn about a system through time. And so it's good to revisit and make improvements to the model. All kinds of data goes into these things, and this isn't even all of it. But geology, structure, what's going on with the elevation, water levels, how the water level is changing, soils, rainfall, water quality, stream flows, spring flows, lake levels, hydraulic properties, transmissivity, talking about pumping, cultural reference and satellite imagery, geophysical mapping, well information, faults, things like that. Generally will all go in. The model architecture, you may hear some folks talk about model cells a little later, but typically the models, the codes that we use is ModFlow, developed by USGS, and basically the models divided up into blocks, or the aquifers divided up into blocks. We assign parameters to those blocks and calibrate. And you can do flow in 3 dimensions, laterally, sideways, up and down. In terms of, there's been some models that have been done in the past in this area. Going back by the Bureau of Economic Geology in '83, just kind of a sub-area. Water Development Board developed a model in 1989, David Thorkelson. Bureau of Economic Geology did a larger model in '99, working with the Water Development Board. The model was done by RWH Hardin Associates for Region G, which that would have been for the 2002 State Water Plan. And then the legislature created at our agency the Groundwater Availability Modeling Program, which puts standards on the models and it made them transparent. A lot of times these models, you never see the modelers. They don't like daylight much, so you never see them. They're kind of vampires of the hydrogeologic world. Groundwater availability modeling kind of forced them out into the daylight to where people could see how the models would be developed, offer up data and concerns. And so this program, it's actually under Larry French, you're going to hear from a little later, develops these models and then works to make improvements to those models, make it better with time. These models are important because there's state-required data that goes into groundwater management plans. It comes from the models that we provide to the districts. The models are generally the tool that is used to evaluate desired future conditions, which you're going to hear from Larry French about in a bit. When we calculate how much can be pumped for those desired future conditions, we use these models. And then statute requires that we provide total estimated recoverable storage to the districts, and these models are used for that as well. First groundwater availability model was done in 2003. It was just for the Carrizo Wilcox. And then shortly on the heels of that, 2004, through a contractor, we added the Queen City and the Sparta to that model. So the Queen City, Sparta, Carrizo Wilcox are all in one model at the present time. And then there's a current project going on now, funding from the state as well as funding from a number of the districts to make improvements to that model, and particularly taking a look at effects of faults on groundwater flow. So faults are cracks in the geology that can have an impact on how the groundwater is flowing. So that study is progressing. And that was my last slide, so I've got 3 minutes left for questions. Maybe 1 minute, but.
Might I add to that particular slide that there's also a groundwater surface water package that's being added to this dam.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. So there's also a groundwater surface water package being added to this dam. If you recall back earlier, I talked about effective recharge, margarita recharge. A lot of the original dams we put together were focused on that effective recharge and didn't do a good job of reflecting that localized recharge. And so we're undergoing an effort to upgrade the models to include a better reflection of surface water groundwater interaction. Any other questions? Sir?
You know, on your map, you showed the aquifers, you showed the solvent and the hatch.
Uh-huh.
And so the Carrizo, Wilcox, there was a small red stripe at the bottom. Did that show there's an outcrop further south, or was that just where it was overlaying the next aquifer?
Question was where I showed the solid and the hatch and the Carrizo Wilcox. It was like a red line kind of towards the bottom. That was, I don't remember that, but I think that was, oh, is it right here? Oh, here we go. Where are you looking? So there is some,
Yeah, right.
here?
Yeah, right where it goes to the Gulf Coast, right there, that red line right there.
Yeah, so there is some overlap. So for example, the Carrizo, there's parts of this aquifer where you drill a well, you can go through the Gulf Coast aquifer and tap into the Carrizo Wilcox. Really deep. You know, some of this stuff is actually more than a mile deep when you get down here to get that deep to hit the Carrizo Wilcox. It's probably warm water. You notice over here the Edwards aquifer overlaps with the Carrizo. So similar thing, Edwards is underneath the Carrizo Wilcox in this part of the county. Looks like in y'all's area there's not maybe there's a little bit of overlap here with the Gulf Coast, Burleson County. Thanks for the question. Anything else?
How did those guys were average or zero? You think about how the depth of the elevation?
Question is how deep is the aquifer? Can I speak about the elevation? It's an excellent question. It's kind of hard to do an average because, you know, up here you're talking shallow, maybe in some places where the aquifer's direct connection with the stream, zero. You know, it's there at land surface, and it goes as deep as over 5,000 feet down here. Honestly, I don't know off the top of my head. I can't remember what it is for this area here, but you know, you start getting down to hundreds, over 1,000 feet as you get deeper, as you head towards the coast, as these layers are moving down. How deep is the Trinity in Milam County? Don't know off the top of my head, but it's going to be pretty deep since it's down that area. You know, I know up at Dallas, Fort Worth, and Waco, you're talking at least through here, you're talking 1,000 feet deep to the top of the aquifer. So I don't know what it is, but I bet it's probably somewhere around there, maybe a little higher. That water might be hot too. Uh-oh. Say again?
3,500 feet, give or take.
3,500 feet, give or take. So technically that's correct, but over 1,000. Sir?
Would you consider the Carrizo Wilcox mostly confined based on the diagram there?
Sorry, I couldn't hear the last part of your question.
Is it mostly a confined reservoir since the majority of it is in the hatch there?
So wherever you see the hatches, it's confined.
Okay.
And it gets a little weird over here because this is actually unconfined. Unconfined.
Right.
I should clarify though that, like, let's say you're looking at the Simsboro, and Simsboro is part of this. And so wherever the Simsboro is, and as you go this way, it's going to be confined. So the Simsboro confined area overlaps some of this that shows as unconfined. But to answer your question, in most of these aquifers down here, in most of their areas in the confined area. And quite frankly, that's where like most of the potential for production is at, because that Artesian pressure we talked about, that's what, in my opinion, helps make these aquifers very productive, because you can get a big drawdown and a strong driving force of water towards your wells that you couldn't get as you get closer to the outcrop of the recharge zone.
And kind of a follow-on, are they being less sensitive to recharging in your models?
Is what sensitive to recharge?
Or
how
refined
sensitive?
aquifers of that nature less sensitive to recharge than looking at your models?
Wonderful question. The question is are the confined aquifers less sensitive to recharge levels? Yes. In fact, I don't want to take too much time. Just looking nervous. If I can't bring the plot back up, but that plot where I showed those big bullseyes and drawdown, since you guys had this burned into your head, probably didn't notice it, but they hinge off the outcrop, the recharge zone. And in particular, oh, here we go, perfect. So yeah, so you see how it decreases to nearly nothing, less than 50 feet. You see this here as well. You see this in the Gulf Coast Aquifer as well. And so what that tells me is that what's limiting what's limiting how much water you can produce in these aquifers is the transmissivity of the aquifers, not the ability for recharge to get down dip. I don't know the numbers, and we'll find out from the model once it gets an improved surface water, groundwater, and then recharge for the Creaser-Wilcox. But we did upgrade this model to better simulate recharge processes, and it is absolutely fascinating. Just looking at the data, I would hypothesize that there's the amount of recharge that's local and comes back out is much larger than the effective recharge coming down. And for up here, it's like a 1% of the total recharge is going down dip towards this pumping center. I would hypothesize the same thing is probably happening in the Creaser-Wilcox. We definitely see it down here in the Gulf Coast. I think that's also happening here. And so the follow-on is that the recharge that's going on with droughts and climate and all that jazz. How the aquifer responds down dip in the deeper parts is not sensitive to that.
Sorry, I missed your earlier part. Did you mention that the Creaser-Wilcox was actually a group of aquifers?
I did, yes. Okay. The question was that I mentioned it was a group of aquifers, and I did. We're kind of lumpers at the state. You tell me when I need to get down.
You've got one more question.
I'm going to do this gentleman over here since he hasn't asked the question.
The Aquifer, is it used in the Dallas-Fort Worth area?
It is not. The question is the overall aquifer is used in the Dallas-Fort Worth area? Not for lack of trying, though. Boone Pickens was trying to sell that water to really anybody who would buy it, and it needed a pipeline because the real money was in the pipeline, not in the water. But he was certainly trying real hard to sell it to Dallas-Fort Worth, but ultimately he sold to a local water provider, the Canadian River Municipal Water Authority, who provides water to Amarillo, Lubbock, and a number of other communities. Thank you.
Folks, let's thank Robert Mace. I would, yes, their annual